So good morning, and thank you for coming to a more authentic Galician day. Rainy, gray. That's truer, right? The 2 days before were a little fake. I felt like I was in the Caribbean island where I was born, but no, this is more like Galicia. So it's a more Galician, more authentically Galician experience. So the title of the section today is Transculturalism and Hybridization. And we're going to go in the order that the program appears. There is an absentee, Sekber Kant from Turkey, couldn't get the travel papers in time, so he couldn't make it. So we're going to start with Eleonora Angela of the University of Naples. And the title of her presentation is The Making of a Feminist Paradigm, an Italian Woman in Egypt at the outset of the 20th century. So do you need the...
Oh,
okay.
Thank you. So I would like to address the main issues of this year's AEMI conference, Diasporas and Cultural Identities, by analyzing as a case study that of an Italian woman who lived in Cairo, Egypt, at the beginning of the 20th century. In recent decades, the concept of diaspora and identity have become very popular, even fashionable, in humanities as well as in social sciences. At the same time, these concepts have undergone critical analysis on the basis of which many scholars have deconstructed them and questioned their utility for their fields of study. However, scholars interested in Italian communities in Egypt seem to be unaware of the use of these categories to analyze the life of communities settled in Alexandria, Cairo, and Suez, i.e. the main centers of Italian migration to Egypt. For example, if we take a look at a bibliography on the Italian community in Egypt, we immediately note that there are very few titles which contain the term diaspora, whereas in the ample bibliography of migration study, the notion of diaspora is nowadays one of the most used. Even the concept of identity, although more used than that of diaspora, has so far had no great success among the researchers interested in Italian migration to Egypt. Are these studies on the Italian community in Egypt impervious to the use of these categories? Have the researchers considered that of identity an analytic frame inadequate to their research? In my opinion, the silence over the use of these terms is due to the fact that the issues of Italian migration to Africa emerged with difficulty in migration studies. In other words, the available studies concerning Italian migration to Egypt are generally quite old, and their traditional treatment, in which we find little, if any, use of the concepts of identity and diaspora, has been influencing the debate over this historical question. However, in this paper, I don't intend to discuss whether the concept of diaspora could be a useful category for the study of Italian outflow to Egypt, or if this migration could be considered a diaspora. Nor am I interested in retracing the evolution that the idea of cultural identity has undergone in scholarships in this field. Many studies have been carried out to approach this important methodological question. I prefer to approach this set of problems indirectly by telling you the story of Clelia Golfarelli, an Italian woman who lived in Egypt, as an example of hybridization and transnationalism. So, to begin with, I will retrace the context of Italian migration to Egypt by answering two major questions, which are why and who were the Italians attracted to the African Mediterranean countries, and Egypt in particular. I will then go on to describe to you who this woman was and what her experience was in Cairo, with particular attention to her conception of Muslim women. Finally, I will conclude by trying to explain why our experience could be considered an interesting case for the themes of our conference. From a merely quantitative point of view, Italian migration to Africa represents, with its 1.5 of the total migration flow between 1876 and 1925, a marginal phenomenon. From a qualitative point of view, however, these flows show the same features which have attracted attention to analogous movements, like the formation of complex and lasting groups entailing contacts with the local society. Egypt, together with Tunisia and Algeria, represented the major North Africa destination for Italian people between the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th. Long-established migrant communities before Italian unification helped generate new outflows, as well as in developing migrant networks. In fact, the Italian presence in Egypt dates back to the early Middle Ages, and in particular to the heterogeneous society generated after the Crusades. Over and above the political and religious conflicts due to the so-called Holy Wars, they enabled continuous movements and exchanges between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. In this context, the Muslim sovereigns granted capitulation to Italian merchants, facilitating their settlement in Egypt. However, a real Italian community in Egypt only took shape during the 19th century when Muhammad Ali started a program of reforms to modernize Egypt, attracting a great many foreign people, including many Italians. Just to mention the best-known example, we may consider the construction of the Suez Canal, started in 1859 and finished 10 years later, which drew engineers, architects, workmen, artisans, etc. Of course, there were also unskilled workers, but as a whole, Italian immigration to Egypt in this period involved above all the elite, and in particular experts, specialists, soldiers, and professors. They often came from the affluent classes, and many were erudite. Finally, let us not forget all the Italian exiles who made their way to Egypt after the failure of a number of attempted insurrections in the first half of the 19th century. From a numerical point of view, the Italian community in Egypt grew in importance as from the second half of the 1880s. In the course of one century, from 1820 to 1920, the Italian population increased from 6,000 to 50,000 in Cairo and Alexandria, becoming the second largest foreign group after the Greeks. However, the quantitative increase in the Italian community did not correspond to qualitative growth. As from the last decades of the 19th century, and particularly from 1882, when Egypt fell under British political hegemony, the Italian community began to lose importance. This period, compared to the decades in which the Italians had served as administrative officials, doctors, engineers, artisans, and skilled laborers, was characterized by an increasing migration of farmers and unskilled laborers, mainly from Sicily, Calabria, and Apulia. In these years, the employment opportunities for skilled workers became less frequent and more precarious, while Italian immigration to Egypt became increasingly of a temporary nature. However, in evoking the figure of Clelia Golfarelli, we are not referring to unskilled workers, but to a woman of the first and more elitist migration wave. Clelia Golfarelli was a Florentine teacher who lived in Cairo between 1910 and 1912, where her husband, Vincenzo Fago, worked as a librarian at the local university. Like many, but not all the women in that period, Golfarelli went to Egypt to join her husband, But she was not just a simple partner accompanying him. There, she taught at the Regie Scuole Tecniche Italiane del Cairo, which was one of the several schools that the Italian authorities, like the French and British ones, had founded in Egypt. She gave courses in Italian for the Cairo section of the Dante Alighieri Society, whose aim was diffusion of the Italian language and culture throughout the world. She also established contacts with the women belonging to the local royal family. Like many European women visiting a Muslim country for the first time, Golfarelli was struck by the local population, and particularly by the condition of the women. So she decided to write newspaper articles for the Italian readers describing her experience there. It is beyond my scope here to discuss her writings extensively, and so the best I can do is to offer you just a few examples and some consideration about her attitude towards Muslim women. However, before analyzing her writings, two further considerations are necessary for a full understanding of the context in which this Italian woman lived and worked. First of all, when Clelia Golfarelli was in Egypt, European and Arab Muslim women experienced colonizations, albeit from different positions. Second, it was precisely then that a feminist ideology began to take shape in Egypt, as in other countries in North Africa. Clelia Golfarelli was an attentive observer of both these events, and her articles are a helpful source to investigate the ideas of an Italian woman about Muslim society at the beginning of the 20th century. Surprisingly, Clelia Golfarelli chose to follow what was an absolutely original path for the Italian press in describing the Muslim women's world. She let the Muslim women speak for themselves, a singular act in contrast with the silence of the Italian women's press, which reflected a lack of knowledge about the world of Muslim women. In one of her articles, for example, Golfarelli translated the appeal that Princess Ifete Hassan, a member of the local Khedive's family, wrote inviting her peers to rise up against their subaltern role in Islamic society. This appeal already contains the main claims of the nascent feminist consciousness, including, first, the will of the early Muslim feminists, the women belonging to the urban middle and upper classes, to articulate their demands for emancipation within the Islamic tradition, which had to be rethought, however, through independent investigation of the sacred and Islamic law. Second, the desire to launch national struggles for the affirmation of women's rights, that is, the will to maintain a distinction between the Egyptian feminist movements and the Western ones, a distinction indicative of the widespread anti-colonial and independent discourse of the period. Publishing this appeal, Golfarelli pursued two aims. On the one hand, she attempted to see the Muslim women's world from their own perspective, while, on the other, she made Italian women acquainted with the Egyptian feminist movement then in its early days. Muslim women had a further occasion to speak up for themselves when Clelia Golfarelli translated a review written by a Muslim Turkish woman of Marcel Tiner's book Notes d'une voyageuse en Turquie. This review questioned the way Marcel Tiner described Turkish women and, generally speaking, unwittingly evoked Western stereotypes about the people of the East. The Florentine teacher encourages her readers to rethink the image that they have of Muslim women. Finally, when Golfarelli herself takes the floor, she becomes a spokeswoman for the Egyptian feminist main claims. In the article, significantly entitled Per le musulmane, so for Muslim women, Golfarelli gives a direct account of her daily experience of Muslim women, censoring the stereotypical Orientalist image through which they are perceived. She criticizes the representation of Arab Muslim women offered in the works of Pierre Loti, Marcel Tiner, and Paul Bourget. For example, she remarks with particular emphasis that the apparent civil and cultural inferiority of Arab women to Europeans is not due to the intrinsic racial or cultural limitation, but to their subaltern political and social condition. The action of a certain Turkish woman who took off her veil in 1908, therefore, was not mere imitation of European standards of civilization, but harked back to the original Islamic law, which, according to the Muslim woman, had never compelled them to wear the veil. Reflecting on the relation between European and Muslim people, Golfarelli even argued that those who hope to see Muslim people adopting European customs in their countries wish for vuote parvenze di civiltà, that is, empty semblances of civilization. In any case, this urgency to reduce this distance between Italians and Muslims needs some qualification. A case in point, which should not surprise us, is raised by Clelia Golfarelli's first visit to a harem. In one of her articles, in fact, she describes her experience during a party organized by the princess of the local Khedivial family, representing the environment in which she was received as a very similar to the description by the best-known Orientalists of that period. Eunuchs, slave, princesses are at the center of her tale, and the colors and perfumes of the Orient she had criticized throughout the article on Marcel Tiner's report also find a place in her account. She tries to maintain a certain critical capacity, representing the woman of the harem as the same who engage in struggles for greater social equality, although her description of the harem, the archetypal place of Western imaginings, is partially filtered through the stereotypes of Orientalist literature. At the same time, when she refers to the civilizing mission, she adopts double standards. If it is pursued by Europeans, especially French and English, it is considered unjust, while if it is promoted by the more civilized Italians, obviously I'm using Golfarelli categories, it is advocated. The reason is that she believes that the Italian and Muslim claims for emancipation are grounded on the same basis, as I will shortly explain. From the observation made so far, it may be seen that the thought of Clelia Golfarelli on the East and the Muslim women is complex and, in some respects, contradictory. However, the aim here is not to criticize the inconsistencies in her thinking, nor is it my concern simplistically to certify complicity with or resistance to the dominant values in Egyptian society. Rather, I would like to trace out the complex of outcomes of the encounter between the so-called Western and Eastern cultures in the age of imperialism. In current Italian historiography, practical feminism, whose origins in the peninsula date back of the beginning of the 20th century, and which is characterized by philanthropic activities and moderate political and social claims, is generally considered a limit for the creation of international feminist networks. Clelia Golfarelli joined this movement, participating in the first Congress of Italian Women in 1908, which was organized by this feminist. But I hope I have in any case shown that she succeeded in arriving at a profound understanding of the feminist Arab-Muslim struggles. Furthermore, recounting the fortunes of this movement, she presents an enthralling and indeed passionate account of a moral battle. Clelia Golfarelli hoped at that time that Italian and Muslim women could both experience a spiritual rebirth on the ground of gender. A modest political project for us, but based on a brilliant analysis. Thank you.
So next we're going to have Solange Maslowski from the Charles University in Prague. And the title of her presentation is Freedom of Movement of Persons in the Outermost Regions of the European Union, the Case of Reunion Island. Oh, there it is.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank Emilia and the AMI Association for inviting me to present my speech today. So I'm very glad to be among you today. I will speak about the freedom of movement of union citizens, so citizens of the European Union, in the outermost regions of the EU. Before starting my presentation, I would like to say some words about my current research. Today, I'm concentrating on freedom of movement of union citizens, and mainly I'm focusing on the limits of the right to reside and to move to another member state. And there are three main limits, in fact, that allow a member state to either to terminate, either to restrict the right of residence of a union citizen in its territory. The first category of limits, it's a threat to public policy. For example, if you belong to a dangerous religious organization, your host member state is allowed to terminate your stay. In case also of security policy, threat to security policy, if you are a terrorist. In case of health policy, if you have a dangerous disease with epidemic potential, the state is allowed to terminate your stay. The second category, if your use of the social assistance represents an unreasonable burden on the social security system of the host member state. And the third category of limits is abuse of right. For example, in cases of marriages of convenience, fake marriages, or benefit tourism, social tourism, so-called social tourism. So a member state is allowed to terminate your stay, even if you are a union citizen who has the fundamental right of freedom of movement. And today, since the economic crisis, and since the last enlargement of the European Union to southern, central, and eastern European countries, we are facing like a crisis of freedom of movement of union citizens, and some member states are like requiring some changes in the current legislation. And there are like three directions that are possible. Either to do what we have been doing since last years. It means like continuing the integration of union citizens and giving more rights. Yes, because I forgot to tell you something before. So there is a trend to limit freedom of movement of union citizens, but especially of economically inactive union citizens. Workers, migrant workers are welcome, but economically inactive are not really welcome. So this integration direction would be to give more rights to economically inactive union citizens. to facilitate their stay in the host member state. The second direction is statu quo. It's what we have now. It means that economically inactive union citizens are not treated equally to migrant workers. You know, their right of residence for more than 3 months is depending on their possessing sufficient financial resources and sickness insurance. And the third direction would be what some member states are requiring, a stricter restrictive legislation, more limitations of the freedom of movement of economically inactive union citizens. For example, facilitating more like expulsions of union citizens and forbidding them to come back again to the host member state. So this is I am studying the freedom movement of union citizens on continental Europe, but I decided to make a change. And I'm just starting a new research on freedom of movement outside the continental Europe in the outermost region of the Union, of the European Union. And I want to check if the limits to freedom of movement are equally applied in outermost regions, if we encounter the same problems or not. I don't have yet the answer because I'm just starting. So next year, maybe I could present you my results. So just a few words about outermost regions. So we are totally aware that the European Union is composed of the 28 member states, but this is, and about we are aware of the continental European Union, but European Union has also some 9 outermost regions which are present in different parts of the world. So you have like 5 outermost regions which belongs to France. We have Reunion Island, we have Mayotte, we have Guadeloupe, Martinique, Saint Martin, we have French Guiana, and then we have like Azores and Madeira, which belong to Portugal, and Canary Islands, which belong to Spain. So you can see that the European Union is not only present on the European continent, but also everywhere in the world. And these outermost regions are like ambassadors of European values, of European culture, in the wider world, and strategically they are very important. So the main characteristics of these outermost regions. First, we have to remind that they are full part of the European Union. What does it mean? It means that their citizens are union citizens. It means that they are free to move and travel within the territory of the 28 member states, and they have the same right as any union citizen in continental Europe. And they are the outermost regions, so are outside the European continent and represent the external borders of the European Union. What we often forget when we are talking about the external borders of the European Union, we are thinking just about the European external border, but European Union has also its external borders outside the European continent. So it means that what I said, that the outermost citizens are union citizens, and it means also, because there are some obligations as well, outermost regions are like obliged to apply EU law as any other regions in Europe, with some exception. For example, they are not part of the Schengen area. That was for the French outermost region. That was the will of the French government not to integrate its outermost region in the Schengen area. So now I'm going to say some words about the specificities of these outermost regions. So they are a bit different than the continental regions. First, because of their geography. They are very far from the European continent. Réunion is 9,000 kilometers from France. It takes 11 hours by plane to get there. So they are a bit isolated as well in their region. They are small size, you know, Réunion is like 70 kilometers, 90 kilometers. They have a different climate, cyclones, with a volcano as well. There is part of Réunion, for example, which is inhabited because of a volcano eruption. They have a very fragile economy as well, with a narrow domestic market, with trade deficits, with very high costs for transport and communication, very high cost of living. Its products in Réunion are like 40% more expensive than in France. Social aspect, they have a very high population growth, but also a very high level of unemployment, and with a very low medium salary in comparison to continental Europe. And of course, they have a bit different histories than the European continental regions. So these specificities of the outermost regions led the European legislator to provide them with some derogation with the application of European law. So there is an article in the Lisbon Treaty on the functioning of the European Union, Article 349, which takes into consideration the structural, social, and economic situation of this outermost region to make them benefit from special measures. But usually these measures are like advantageous. And it makes, these measures usually like concerns like areas like trade policies, fiscal policies, or access to structural funds from the European Union. I would like to concentrate on the case of Réunion Island. So it's a French outermost region, and it was, just one word, I like to say it was the first place where the euro was launched, because Réunion was the more eastern part of the European Union, just before Greece. So the euro was first launched in Réunion, and after in Greece, and after elsewhere. Who are the migrants who are coming in Réunion Island? First, we have the Union citizens from the member states of the European Union. For example, Spanish, German, Dutch people, Belgian. Usually they are very well integrated, and usually they are coming as workers. There are some exceptions. I heard from some local association that there are like some young German or Dutch young men coming to Réunion Island without sufficient financial resources. They just have money to pay for their plane tickets, between 600 and 1,000 euros. They come to Réunion Island, and then they think that they will live on fresh water and love on a tropical island, that everything will be easy. But they are very quickly surprised, because Réunion Island is very expensive. You know, it's 40% more expensive than in France. And if you don't have like a house with a garden where you can plant your vegetables and your fruits, it's becoming difficult. And so these young men usually have to have recourse to local charity help. So, but I will have to check the number of these people, these economic inactive people without sufficient resources, and how they get social assistance, and I will have to check it later. The second category of migrants are union citizens as well from Mayotte, I told you. And Mayotte is a newcomer in the European Union. I think it's since 2015. before Mayotte was like overseas territory. So it was not full part of European Union, just a French overseas territory, and it didn't have to apply EU law. It was like considered as an associated country. Since 2015, I think Mayotte became an Outermost region of the EU, so it's full part of the European Union. And many people from Mayotte are coming to Reunion Island, which is much more developed. And their integration is quite problematical. And most of them are like inactive persons. Mm-hmm. And they represent like around 20% of the foreigners migrating to Reunion. And then we have a third category of person. We have like third country nationals, mainly from Madagascar, 55%, from Mauritius of the Seychelles Islands. And these ones are well integrated and composed mainly of workers or like family members of Reunionese people. Mm-hmm. So I will insist on the problematic category for migrants from Mayotte. So what characterizes migrants from Mayotte? First, the migrants who come from Mayotte are composed of the poorest part of the population of Mayotte. It means that they usually don't speak well French, they are not well educated, they are economically inactive, they are composed mainly of women with many children without a father, and they are dependent on social assistance. And most of them are like Muslim as well. And I would like to say some word about the reaction of Reunionese people towards this, the people from Mayotte. Usually Reunionese people, which is composed of a very multicultural population, is very open to other religions, to other culture, and to other population. But there is one exception for people from Mayotte. So the Reunionese people are always complaining that immigrants from Mayotte are like coming just to benefit from social assistance. They are like benefit tourists, that they are unable to integrate, that they live in social houses, very dirty, that they have another culture, that they don't speak French, and that because they are not doing anything, that they are bringing violence to Reunion. And until now, there is no official reaction from the French authorities in Reunion, you know. No official complaints or no expulsion, neither detention of people from Mayotte. I would just would like to say some words about what happens on the European continent. On the European continent, there are official complaints of host member states against economically inactive union citizens. And there are many union citizens who are being expelled from their host member state because they don't have sufficient resources. And there are union citizens who are being detained. But this is not the case, even if the population, the Reunionese population is complaining, there is still not cases of expulsions or detention of people from Mayotte, but it might come. So there is a detention center in Reunion Island, but it had been empty for illegal migrants, but it's empty for 2 years. So they are talking about closing it. So we will see. And why these migrants from Mayotte are not welcome? Why? Because they are less welcome than third country nationals. They are less welcome than people from Madagascar and Mauritius. It's not a question of religion, because they are Muslim, but there are a lot of Muslims in Reunion Island as well. It's not a question of numbers, because they are just representing 20% of foreigners. It's not a question of citizenship, because they are union citizens. It might be their economic situation. They are jobless, they rely on social assistance, they are living in dirty accommodations, social accommodations, and they are also, they represent very visible community. In fact, they are dressed traditionally and they have specific like makeup, you know, and that makes them easily like this woman, for example. This is typical from a woman from Mayotte. They have this mask, and it's a sign of beauty, you know. So, and most of them are not educated because they are the poorest part of. There are many people in Mayotte who are very well educated, who speak better French than French people from the continent, but these ones are not well educated and not really speaking well French. They remind me, in fact, they remind me a lot, the Roma, Union citizen from Roma community origin in continental Europe, like the Mayotte, the population, the Roma as well, are economically inactive migrants for most of them. They have different habits. They are easily, easily, you can easily recognize them, distinguish them. So, so I will have to look more about that. So this is just a starting research, and I will tell more about my results next year. So thank you for your attention.
Since Javier Colodron is not here, Philip is going to tell us about Galatians in the Cuban Anarchist movement, right? Okay.
Okay, good morning. Unfortunately, Javier can't be here today, but he's given me a copy of the paper he was going to present about Galician people as the leadership of Cuban anarchism from 1880 to 1898. Broadly speaking, the paper's divided into three parts. Firstly, I will speak about the economic situation of Cuba at the end of the 19th century and how this led to changes in the workers' movements. Next, I will talk about the role of anarchism within the workers' movements. And finally, I will talk about the role of Galicians within that. At the end of the 19th century, Cuba went through a process of modernization as a consequence of a huge development of the production and exportation of the island's main products, coffee, sugar, and tobacco. However, the biggest change in the socio-economic situation was the abolition of slavery. The debilitation of slavery as a base of the island's economy developed in a gradual and uneven way, depending on the types of production in particular areas. With the new economic situation resulting from the Industrial Revolution as a background, the enslaving bourgeoisie started to accept the abolition of slavery as fundamental for the development of modern capitalist production. The necessary and progressive substitution of an enslaved workforce for a wage-earning one sped up because of anti-slavery elements which started to increasingly join the Cuban independence movements. The final blow to the state model of slavery happened on February the 13th, 1880, with the Abolition Law, which imposed the substitution of the slavery system for an 8-year patronage, which would give captives their freedom and simultaneously give slavers time enough to develop a new exploitation system. Abolition was the beginning of a new production model on the island, that is, capitalism. However, it would not be true to say that the workers' situation improved much with the end of slavery. In the countryside, job instability remains the predominant reality, since basic Cuban agricultural products are only cultivated at certain times of year. In the months of the sugar harvest, there was a tremendous demand for work. However, during the so-called dead time, tiempo muerto, massive unemployment condemned workers into a situation of extreme necessity. Work conditions were especially hard. The working hours exceeded 14 in most cases, commonly extending up to 18. The salaries received for those long hours were around 20 pesos a month, which was a very low amount. It was only with the end of the 10-year war and the beginning of the decade of the 80s that the Cuban workers really started to organize and create a proper labor movement. This is due to the fact that the Spanish government, hoping for Cuba's loyalty, included in the pact at the end of the war a series of reforms, including, amongst other things, freedom of association and press. It was in this atmosphere of relative freedom that real gains began to be made in the workers' movement. And this was the case for anarchism, which quickly took the lead of the incipient labor movements. The internationalism attached to the anarchist tendency set an associational archetype that reached the bulk of workers, including Peninsular, Creoles, and non-whites. In this new frame, popular associations such as trade unions, cooperatives, and mutual benefit societies started to multiply. The Recreo de Obreros, a society created in 1876, to welcome all Cuban workers, became the headquarters where these collectives would celebrate their meetings and establish links of solidarity. Taking the model proposed by the Recreo as an example, craftsmen founded centers where educational, cultural, and assistance services were offered. Also, labor and newspapers promoting class consciousness were published. With anarchism consolidated as a guide in a fervent atmosphere of proletarianization of the working classes, the so-called Círculo de Trabajadores, workers' circle, appeared, becoming a fundamental part of the labor movement. This association was the main center around which Cuban anarchism pivoted in the 19th century. It served as a place in which different associations could have their offices and meetings. Their regulations, as part of a federal pretension, stipulated that the premises would be handed over free of charge to any associate who asked for them for labor movement purposes. This federalism, present both in the administration and the regulations of the workers' circle, points to a clear influence of the anarchist sectors in the heart of the organization. It is within this context of associationism and anarchist expansion that we find a relevant Galician presence. Even though we cannot know with certainty the exact numerical importance of Galician anarchists because of the secrecy usually associated with dissident movements such as anarchism, we can indeed affirm that the presence of Galician natives is very significant on a qualitative level. According to data extracted from the Cuban National Archive related to court processes against anarchists in Cuba, Galician people were present in anarchist boards both on theoretical and practical levels. That is, they were part of trade unions and their means of dissemination. Beginning with the latter, the means of dissemination, the presence of José Ramón Vidani Bullo stands out. Born in A Coruña, he was the director of the weekly magazine, The Free Thinker. He was taken to court in Havana in November 1891, together with the native of Extremadura, Enrique Picón, because of slander against the state and against the priest, Emilio Fernández González, included within his publications. While censorship was starting to threaten anarchists' freedom of speech, the Free Thinker still openly declared itself a defender of ideas of freedom and a promoter of revolutionary socialism, which was the name anarchism was given at the time. Excuse me. To continue with the Galician presence inside of Cuban anarchism's journalistic and propagandistic system, we find another native of A Coruña, José Taboada. Taboada was judged for inciting rebellion through a printing house in 1891. The presence of this individual is important in two ways. On the one hand, the text he wrote was published in the weekly publication The Producer, El Productor. Founded in 1887, this was the Cuban anarchist movement's most important newspaper. Only the most important anarchist propagandists on the island were allowed to write in it, which makes Taboada an outstanding member of Cuba's anarchist community. However, what makes Taboada's role even more relevant for Cuba's anarchism is the content of the text which actually cost his arrest, titled the 1st of May Section Manifesto. It is the foundational manifesto of a section of propagandist actions of which, as deduced from the text signed by Taboada, Taboada himself was an active member. The section's main goal was the creation of a, and I quote, network of propaganda with the purpose of making the bourgeois system that leads us disappear. Furthermore, it was depicted as a follower of the Chicago martyrs, international anarchist icons. The section also pointed at a list of enemies it plans to fight in an active way: the state, the bourgeois, and the landowner. To fight these enemies, it advocated for a, and I quote again, war without barracks, a war to the death in which all kinds of weapons will be used. It encouraged class struggle, claiming that peace should never exist between the exploiter and the exploited. Based on this information, we can see that Taboada was not only an anarchist propagandist, but also one of the leaders of Cuban anarchism. Also related to propagandistic activity is the case of Maria González. There is not any institutional document about her activity as a supporter of anarchism. However, in the pages of The Corsair, an anarchist magazine from Coruña, there is evidence of a trial against her that took place in Havana. It is revealed that she was charged with introducing subversive pamphlets onto the islands. During a house search carried out on the occasion of her arrest, issues of The Producer and The Corsair were found ready to be delivered to the proletariat's most subversive sectors. This proves not only the importance of this Galician woman in propagandistic diffusion, but also the clear link between Cuban anarchism and the Galician libertarian movements. But Galician people were not only involved in propaganda. The most relevant Galician presence was to be found in the trade union network of the Workers' Circle. In a dossier found in the Cuban National Archive related to a trial taking place in May 1892 in Havana against the signers of a weekly issue of a magazine called Work, El Trabajo, we find an example which shows the important position of Galician people in the Cuban libertarian associationism. Amongst the 172 accused, more than 50% were of Galician origin. Nevertheless, it is not the quantity that is important, but the high positions that some of them held within the groups that constituted the Workers' Circle. Overall, the Galician members of these groups came broadly from two unions, the In-Workers Union and the Coach and Tram Drivers Union. They did not all occupy managing positions, but as I've said, many of them did. It was not a chance fact that most of them belonged to these unions. Most Galician emigrants residing in Cuba during this period were employed in those two trades, in-workers or drivers. And these represented some of the most active trade unions of the 19th century. If we stick to the facts which took place at the Havana courts following Labor Day 1892, the 1st of May, we clearly recognize the important position these two federate associations from the Workers' Circle held in Cuba's anarchist activism. The drivers were responsible for starting a wave of strikes that succeeded Labor Day, Dia de los Trabajadores, in 1892. The government's censorship of these protest activities on the anniversary of the event in Haymarket was answered firstly by the coach and tram drivers of Havana, who started a strike as a response, a strike which required strong police intervention. On the next day, the strike was followed in solidarity by the inn workers. Following weeks, strikes expanded to the rest of the trades which belonged to the workers' circle. The quick reaction of the drivers and inn workers and the solidarity that uprising brought along give us an idea of the importance these two groups had in the Cuban labor movement at the end of the 19th century. The tremendous implication of Galicians in Cuban anarchism was related to a large extent to Galician people's chain migrations. Drivers and inn workers were continuously in contact with all kinds of people, which made it easy for them to gain access to all sorts of information, including socialist tendencies coming from Europe. Many studies show the tendency Galician people had to open different types of establishments in Cuba. This led to the fact that, as a result of chain migrations, many other Galician residents would arrive on the islands to work in these establishments, which led to the formation of a great collective of Galician people employed in shops or inns. In conclusion, the facts presented up to this point lead us to see that Galician people constituted a sort of elite inside of Cuban anarchism. They did not limit themselves to be base members of anarchist labor movements, but were also newspaper editors, association directors, and outstanding members of sectors devoted to libertarian action and its propaganda. They had weight within the anarchist movement that was disproportional to their size as a collective, and their chain migrations encouraged this great hierarchical ascension they underwent. Thank you very much.
And last but not least, Maria Fos Moreno of the University of Oviedo here in Spain is going to tell us about Galician music, emigration and otherness, the presence of Galicia in the musical production of Argentinian composers from the mid-20th century. I guess we're going to learn that the tango is actually Galician.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for having accepted my paper. And thank you all for being here. Since the late 19th century, and especially after the Spanish Civil War, there were numerous migratory floods from Galicia to Argentina, becoming into the most substantial group of migrants in that country. The Galician immigrants community kept many of the customs and traditions of their place of origin in the place of settled down, and among them, the music has a very important role serving as a link between past and present because of its ability to remind them about their place of origin. As Elizabeth Sosa argues, Adener, and I quote, is an epistemological position that explores discursively the image of the cultures that made their space in the periphery, end of quote. Besides, according to the same author, otherness as a category of analysis of culture, and I quote, allows visualization of the peripheral subject from different angles, recognize the conceptual expansion of radio and the generation of new approaches. The point of view of otherness allows us to analyze the image of those cultures that have developed in different spaces from the place of origin, which could be considered peripheral. This happens with the Galician culture preserved or reinterpreted in different places of settlement of the Galician immigrants. In this way, we will see how academic music influenced by the Galician culture created in migrations context, in this case in Argentina, becomes a space of the other for the musical Galician historiography, from 2 points of view. We are going to see him, on the one hand, with the composers Juan José Castro and Roberto Camaño, and on the other hand, through the figure of Isidro Maiztegui. The phenomenon of Galician immigration, which began in the late 19th century, brought along a relocation of Galician music and an interesting resurgence of it outside the borders of the Iberian Peninsula, especially in the field of academic music. Despite the long migratory tradition Galician carries in its history and the importance of the musical phenomenon of the emigrant communities, the history of Galician musical historiography is written mainly in relation to the music composed within its territory. This trend was imposed and creates vision of the history of Galician academic music, where those other composers who made their music on the periphery, on the mentioned conception, were excluded or relegated to the background in the construction process of academic discourse. There are a number of composers coming from Galician emigrants or descendants of emigrants who have a guide compositional activity in Argentina, but quite unknown today. Nonetheless, there are some exceptions, such as the case of the composer Andrés Gauss. Among the emigrants Galician musicians that continued their musical and compositional activity in Argentina, names like Egidio Paz, Manuel Prieto, Ricardo Pérez stand out. Some of their compositions with reference to Galicia can be seen in the following table. Because of the brevity of this paper, we want to place a special emphasis on those other Galician musical demonstrations by Argentine composers descendant of Galicia. And it's the case of Juan José Castro and Roberto Camaño. Their family ancestry, the first generation of descendants of Galician immigrants in Argentina, keeps them interested in the Galician culture heritage, and this is reflected in their composition. So, the medieval Galician poetry, and especially Rosalía de Castro's Follas Novas, appear in the repertoire of songs of Castro and Camaño. The selection of these texts shows their commitment with the movement of recovery and diffusion of Galician literary heritage and the protection of the Galician language, which take place from the exile. Similarly, it connects them with the determination of migrants to maintain their language as a distinctive sign of identity. We can see, on the one hand, Juan José Castro creates Dos Canciones de Rosalía de Castro and Cantares de Amor, text by the Galician minstrel Bolseiro. On the other, Roberto Camaño composes Dos Cantos Gallegos, opus 3, and Dos Cantares Galaico-Portugueses del siglo XIII, opus 18. As Marcela González noted, the music composition of these poems contain clear reference to musical rhythm or melodic terms of folk and medieval Galician music, as we can listen in this song. Sorry. Okay. However, the influence of Galician music in the sound level stands out in the Terra Galega Rapsodia para coro y orquesta by Castro. This work was authored by the Centro Gallego of Buenos Aires in 1946, and in this score there are clear references to elements of the Galician musician, such as the alala, the alborada, or the pandeirada. In this line, we can also name the figure of the composer in which we will focus below, Isidro Maiztegui. As Castro and Caamaño, he is part of the first generation of descendants of Galician immigrants in Argentina that decides to incorporate reference to Galicia in their scores. However, it is necessary to explain that there are a difference between them from the point of view of otherness. In the case of Caamaño and Castro, we have talked of otherness from the territorialization of Galician culture, recreation and development of Galician culture in Buenos Aires. Maiztegui is an immigrant musician who, after setting contact with the Galician culture through the Galician community of immigrants, arrives to Spain, where he knows the Galician musical and cultural environment and where he works with important Galician intellectuals, and, as a result, begins to compose Galician works. Despite the above-mentioned, this composer stands as an other foreign in the Galician territory, and he is excluded from the official history of Galician music. So, Maiztegui presents a multifaceted identity in his ideas and in his artistic work, shaped by segments created from the tradition received and select, Argentine, Galician, and Spanish, and fragments from his creative and intellectual work. The fact that interests us here is the selection of the other Galician culture as a constituent part of his identity and his work. And this is influenced mainly by the oral transmission of Galician culture by his mother, a commitment ideology with a Spanish intellectual exiled in Argentina, and above all, its nationalistic Galician consciousness configured from its close relationship with the Galician immigrants community. He was the director of Galician chores like Lembranzas Ultrella, Coral Polifónico Rumorosos, and Terra Nosa. So then, when he came to Spain, they established different links with Galician intellectuals, like Isaac Díaz Pardo, Fernández del Riego, Paz Andrade, etc. Then, in this period, the 10 years that he lived in Spain, he started to compose his Galician work that you can see in this table. Most of these works, as you can see, were composed during the period of that Maiztegui immigrated to Spain. The relevance of his Galician work in his catalog and the storytelling that he makes demonstrates his strong commitment with Galician culture. In these works, we find reference to customs and tradition from Galicia, and, above all, a clear influence of the Galician music is revealed through the employment of resounding allusion of certain traditional instruments like bagpipes, the use of resources of popular music genre, and at other times through the quoting of fragments of works from Galician academic music. It is also necessary to emphasize that in some of the field projects in which he participates as a composer, he includes elements of Galician music. It's the case of Viento del Norte, Sonatas, La Venganza, and maybe in the lost documentary Mariñeiros. Also, at this point, I want to point out that his last work, Seis Poemas Galegos, was created at the request of Professor Luis Pérez Rodríguez after a meeting with Maiztegui in Mar del Plata in 1994. The score was included in the book O Pórtico Poético dos 6 Poemas Galegos de García Lorca, edited by the Consello da Cultura Galega. The world premiere of this composition was in 1996 in this institution, and Maitegi played the piano to accompany the soprano Marta de Castro. We are listening a fragment of this piece. Maybe he played the piano that he have in this album. To conclude, the phenomenon of the Galician immigration in the 19th and 20th centuries brought a fragmentation and a relocation process of context of creation of the Galician music. As you can see in the following quotation, Paulo Cirio indicates, Galician music is like a coin with two faces, one showing the territorial Galicia and another of the Galicia exterior. Both are inevitably different, but both constitute an indivisible unity, and one cannot be understood without considering the other, as it shows a different face of the music of the Galician people. In this way, the otherness as a category of analysis of the scheme of the Galician academic music serves to highlight the importance of peripheral music generated in the context of migration, in this case from Argentina, from 2 points of view. On the one hand, through the study of the implication that generated the discourse of otherness in creating the history of Galician music, we have highlighted the need to increase the concept of Galician academic music and included in Galician music historiography those other composers, immigrants or descendants of immigrants that included reference to Galicia in his works, as is the case of Juan José Castro or Roberto Camaño. On the other, how, from this speech, a new history of Galician music also carries out an approach to music and identity discourse generated from the context of migration, and to consider the circumstances leading certain composers to take as a part of their own identity that other music passed on by their ancestors, as Maite. Whereas Camaño and Castro represent the otherness from the territorialization of Galician culture produced by the phenomenon of the migration, and Maite is an immigrant musician who represents the other foreign within the Galician territory. However, we must bear in mind that both are part of the same reality because both are excluded from the official history of Galician music, despite the importance they had in sustaining and reinterpretation of a Galician musical identity from both sides of the Atlantic. Thank you very much for your attention.
So we do have about 10 minutes for questions, comments. Well, then I'll have to ask a few questions, I guess. For Eleonora, this Italian community in Egypt actually introduced ideas about socialism, Darwinism, free thinking, anarchism, actually a lot of them were anarchists, to a sort of Egyptian intelligentsia. And I was wondering if she plays a role in this. And the other thing that I was wondering, in what language do they communicate with this upper class, or well, it's not upper class, but intellectuals?
a few Italians in Egypt know Arab, but just Italians who... Sorry. Okay. A few Italians in Egypt, in Cairo, Alexandria, and Suez, know Arab, but just Italians who belong to the upper classes. For example, there were a lot of professors, and they not only they know Arab, but they teach Arab language or literature and in the university. But the others who don't know Arab but still belonging to the upper class speaking French, because the upper classes there were also, for example, I say that this woman was in contact with the women of the local family, Khedive local family. They not only they speak in French, but they also, in the end of the 19th century, 1910, 1913, they also write in French. So cultivated people write in French. With English, their language, also the use of the language changed. What I mean, that language became a revendication, and so feminists, for example, they start to write in Arab. So because they want to distinguish their movement from the Western ones. Said for the language. Of course, there were a lot of anarchists, Italian anarchists in the... I'm not an expert on this sector, but there were a lot of Italian anarchists. There are several studies, so maybe if you are interested, I can suggest you something, especially in the end of the 19th century. Then they started Kungab.
There are actually some anarchist newspapers in Italian in Alexandria.
Yes, and they were in contact. Well, thank you.
Okay, and then for Solange, I was wondering, this woman from Mayotte, yeah, that seemed to be relying on the social services, right? What is the difference in terms of the social security and payments? What is the gap between Mayotte and Reunion Island that is enough to attract them?
First, as I told, Mayotte is very young outermost region. It just became outermost region in 2015. So before it was just an associated country of the European Union, and so it didn't. European law didn't have to apply fully over there, And Mayotte is not as developed, economically not as developed as Reunion is, Yeah. And for example, the hospital structures are not well developed. So there are many people from Mayotte coming to Reunion just to get some care, because. So there is a big attraction. They come to Reunion with a hope to find a job and to give an education to their children, Because there is no. In Mayotte, there is a big migration issues in Mayotte, because Mayotte before belonged to the Comoros Islands, and Mayotte is French and Outermost Department of the European Union, and there are many migrants from the Comoros Islands, like migrating illegally to Mayotte by boat, and thousands are dying in the Indian Ocean as well.
But these women are from Mayotte originally.
She's from Mayotte. So the situation in Mayotte is very bad, because you have a lot of migrants from the Comoros Islands. You have thousands of children without any parents, just in the street. No job, no security. So they are trying to come to Reunion, where it's safer and economically richer.
And then for Maria, most of the samples that you gave of music were art music rather than popular music.
Yes, academic music.
Yeah, right. And I was wondering, because I think other Spaniards, not only Galatians, but Spaniards in general, in Argentina, musicians, will complain traditionally that for Argentines, and that's true for most people, Spanish music is equivalent to Andalusian music and flamenco. It's like the rest of Spain does not exist. in the imaginary of the outside world outside of Andalusia and gypsies and flamencos, right? And I was wondering if you found some of that complaints among Galician composers and musicians.
Another composers and musicians
That complain, yeah, in Argentina, right? That complain that this tendency of Argentines to see Spanish music as restricted to flamenco and Andalusian music.
I haven't answered your question. I study the case of only Galician community of immigrants in Argentina, so I don't know who another community, for example, is Andalusians or Basques. What is the case of their music there, or if there are composers that him playing the Andalusian music in his works. I don't know now. Sorry, I cannot understand this question.
Okay. So, any other questions? So I think we're going to take a half an hour break. Is that what we're taking? I'm not too sure. Huh? Is it?